Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We discussed this a bit yesterday in reacting to what Captain Kangaroo impersonator Janet Yellen had to say over the weekend. The typical response from the central planner when it comes to fiscal and monetary mismanagement.
It's the pandemic. Remember, she said that about 7 times.
It's the pandemic's fault.
Pandemic.
The challenges we're facing, starting with inflation, the pandemic's fault, and the supply chain disruptions. Well, that's mostly a private sector thing, so that's the private sector's fault. It's a good piece by Daniel Lacalle, who's a economist and author and fund manager, sort of summarizing what we were saying yesterday. He does it more eloquently than I did. Monetary history shows that policymakers always resort to the same excuses when it comes to printing money and monetary mismanagement. First, they say there's no inflation. Second, they say it's transitory. Third, they blame businesses. Fourth, they blame consumers for overspending. And finally, present themselves as the solution with price controls, which ultimately devastate the economy. We're at about step 3 in that 5-step process. As he writes, we're now in the step where governments blame businesses. Biden blamed rising gas prices on quote-unquote profiteering. And one of his main economic advisors at the National Economic Council, Brian Deese, said pork, chicken, and beef prices rose faster than normal because 4 companies control the supply. And we've also heard from the leftist punditocracy about how if Americans weren't consuming so much, right, then we wouldn't have these price spikes, the greedy, rapacious American consumer. That's the problem.
Well, yeah, because during the pandemic, we were just at home buying things online, they say. And
now if you skip to the last stage or the last step of those 5 steps, those 5 phases that were described by Lacalle, they're presenting themselves as a solution at the same time as they're working through those other steps leading up to 5. Brian Deese, that same economic advisor to Biden, on with Clinton Foundation donor zero over the weekend. What's the solution? $4 trillion more in funny money spent, of course.
Well, inflation is high, and it's affecting Americans in their pocketbook and their outlook. But that concern actually underscores why it's so important to move forward on the Build Back Better bill that Congress is considering. You know, this bill is actually going to address the core costs that American families are facing in childcare, in housing, in healthcare. It will cut the cost of childcare by more than half for most working families. It'll build new housing all around the country to let people find new opportunities to find jobs and live in an affordable way. And it'll do it all while being fully paid for. And this is important. Far from adding to inflation concerns, this bill will do the opposite. Because it's fully paid for, it doesn't add aggregate demand to the economy. It makes these investments while actually offsetting them by increasing taxes on corporations and wealthy individuals. In fact, it will reduce the deficit over the long term. So we have a fully paid for plan to go directly at the costs that typical Americans are facing, increase the productive capacity of our economy. This is what Americans are looking for. They're looking for us to deliver on the things that matter most.
And now come the price controls. That's exactly what those goods and services that's exactly what will be featured with those goods and services, price controls. The same thing when the government provides health care, Medicare or Medicaid. They do so by imposing price controls. I mean, it is playing out exactly as Mr. Lacalle describes it. For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by Kevin Hassett. He's a distinguished visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution and managing director of the Lindsay Group. He served as chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under Trump from 2017 to 2019. His new book, The Drift, Stopping America's Slide to Socialism. Slide is generous. Kevin, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks.
What about what Brian Deese had to say? Is that about right? The Build Back Better is the solution to the inflation problem?
You know that he made like an egregious error, which he didn't even notice, which shows what's wrong with these people. So he said the Build Back Better plan won't add anything to inflation because the tax hikes cancel out against all the spending, right? And so it won't cost anything. Of course, we know the CBO score is going to come out this week, and it's going to cost a lot, and that there are tricks that make it so that if you smooth through the tricks, it costs about $4 trillion. But in any case, you get inflation when you have demand going ahead of supply, right? And so if everybody wants an apple, there's only one guy selling apples, and the price of apples goes up. And so what the tax hikes do is that they whack away at supply. And what the spending does is it adds a lot to demand.
Right.
And so if you add a lot to demand while whacking away at supply, what should happen to inflation, guys? It should go up. And the idea that you would cancel the two, it's just stupid. It's just stupid.
Well, who's in charge making these dumb decisions? I mean,
yeah,
is it a
really
group
does
of
make you
morons
wonder.
or what?
It really does make you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense what they're doing. And it really is leading to inflation. You know, I was on Laura Ingram's show the other day, and I was trying to think of like the word to describe Biden's policies, and I came up with the word econocide. They're trying to kill the economy. I mean, there's no other explanation for it, really.
Well, right.
The policies are just so stupid.
Well,
and,
Kevin,
and the thing, but you know, the thing that really bothers me the most, a lot of things bother me. Bothers me the most is that the White House put all this stuff from like the CEA chairs from Obama and 17 Nobel Prize winners that said that Build Back Better is going to lower inflation. I don't know if you saw these documents.
yeah.
But the point is that shows just what we all know, that and this is what I write about in the Drift, that the socialists have taken over the universities. That you're not allowed to be a Milton Friedman kind of economist anymore in an American university, and you can get Nobel Prizes the more you say that markets don't work. But the fact that there are 17 Nobel Prize-winning economists willing to say that something that juices up demand and crushes supply isn't going to add to inflation means that the economics profession is basically dead.
Well, I mean, two things. One is that's a fallacious line of reasoning. It's an appeal to authority. They can't explain the underlying economics 101, so they make an appeal to prize winners. Number two, as the old saw goes, if you laid all the economists in the world end to end, they wouldn't reach a conclusion. So, 17 Nobel laureates, it's absurd. That's just an absurd line of argumentation, but I know that shiny objects have great appeal to the D.C. press corps, which is also economically illiterate. One thing, though, Jason Furman, who is an economic advisor to Obama, he notes this whole, what you just heard Dee say, we're going to tax the rich and so on and so forth. And obviously what you said about reducing supply and increasing demand will exacerbate inflation, not reduce it. He's 180 degrees wrong. But Furman notes the SALT expansion back to this $4 trillion funny money spend. 66% of those making over $1 million will get a tax cut, an average of about a $17,000 tax cut. So adding that state and local tax deduction back to the $4 trillion spend is paying off the rich in blue states who got hammered under the Trump 2017 tax cuts.
Right. Well, it is a massive giveaway to the rich in those states, but don't forget that those people also got lower marginal tax rates at the time.
No, right.
And so, they lost a little on the state and local deduction, gained a little on the lower marginal rate. And, so it was kind of a wash for most people in most states. But now it's just a raw partisan giveaway to people in 5 states. Like if you, I've run the map. If you run the map of where people benefit from this, it's like New York, California, Connecticut.
Illinois,
most places, there's
right.
almost no effect at all.
Right. The other thing that we understand from what is pending and what's been proposed, and the Wall Street Journal opined on this yesterday, America will be number one in the sort of industrialized world in the highest combined federal and state tax rates. Number one.
Yeah. That's right.
That's
this
bad
goes
for
back
growth.
To the idea of the book, The Drift, right? Like these people really are socialists. They're trying to do a socialist takeover of the country. And when they're in economic denial, they got Nobel Prize winners telling you that up is down. When they're lifting the marginal tax rate higher than they have anywhere else in the developed world, there's like Sweden, France, forget about it. They're pikers compared to the Democrats. Then, you really need to take that seriously as a voter, because they're trying to take the country to a place that I don't think people realize, and that they almost don't admit. Right? So you listen to Biden and Deese talk about the Build Back Better plan, they don't mention the highest marginal tax rate in the developed world. They say, oh, this isn't going to cost anything. It's not going to add to inflation. So they're trying to distract people while they march us towards socialism.
And that big celebration they had yesterday, I mean, everything's going to be better now. Inflation's going to go down. No, it's not. There's nothing to prove that. And as long as you have those supply chain issues and those cargo ships waiting to be, taken into port and unloaded and transferred, this could go on for the foreseeable future.
Oh, sure, and that's a really good point. And there's two things I want to say about that. First of all, do you remember how well the shovel-ready projects worked last time for them?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, not at all. And so if you look, I was in the White House. If you look at how long it takes an infrastructure project to happen, it's like about 6 years on average, because you got to get the permits, you got to get the EPA approval, the designs, everything else.
Contractors.
So there's no way the infrastructure spending is going to have any effect near term on inflation. And so that's like another example of what we're talking about. That all these people asserting that the infrastructure bill is going to lower, like Jason Furman did that, lower inflation. It's just ridiculous. It's just partisanship rather than economics. And I mean, frankly, they really should be ashamed at the kind of stuff that they're pushing. But the second thing is that they basically came out and celebrated yesterday because they kind of know that it's going to be. I think it's going to be the last thing. I don't think that Manchin and Sinema are going to fall for this. And I think that the House is going to pass a bill, but I really have a hard time seeing all this stuff making it through the Senate.
Just on the topic of infrastructure, there was this good write-up by a couple of economists at Johns Hopkins about the city of Baltimore. Our nation's crumbling infrastructure. That's one of these pat politicians' lines that don't really mean anything because they don't really know anything. But infrastructure is mainly a state and local issue. You have some federal support over the top, and it's usually based on matching funds. But then why is it always crumbling when we're doing at the state and local level big infrastructure spends? Both parties love to do that. The same thing at the federal level. And we did shovel-ready projects a little more than a decade ago, and now we're doing that times two here again. Baltimore. In 2018, Baltimore leaked away over 25% of its water, significantly more than most comparable cities. They go through the wastewater system and the water system, and just how decrepit Baltimore's infrastructure is, the critical infrastructure. And we could do the same thing in Chicago if we did the same sort of analysis. And so you have mismanagement at the state and local level, really the local level, then up to the state level, where they provide the same sort of role of blank checks that the federal government then does at the federal level. And it just sort of continues to go both up and down. But the infrastructure continues to crumble. And there's never any accountability for how all of this money was actually spent, what the return on investment is, what sort of improvements were made that are measurable in critical systems like water and wastewater treatment in big cities. All that's just by the boards because we wrote a blank check, we called it infrastructure, and now we're on to the next thing.
Right, and it's actually even worse than what you just said, because one of the biggest things in the infrastructure bill that everybody was dancing around the White House while I'm celebrating yesterday is a massive giveaway to Amtrak. So it is like a federal infrastructure program, but the massive giveaway to Amtrak is just cash for the union members who give all their campaign contributions to Democrats. And so for the most part, there's like almost no Amtrak infrastructure. They're just, putting cash in for the unions. And that is actually a big story of the nation's infrastructure. So if you look, public transit gets about half the highway, public transit spending, a huge amount of money every year. And the public transit is really, really inefficient because it's all government employee unions that really, really jack up the costs with both high salaries and rigid work rules. And so it's one of my favorite points to make when I'm teaching this to students at the university is that if you actually want to think about what organization is most responsible for climate change in the U.S., it's probably the public transit unions. Because the public transit unions make it so expensive and so inconvenient to take public transit that nobody does, and everybody drives their car. And if you could move They wrote a paper about this once. If you could move the U.S. to the level of Canada in terms of use of public transit, then we could cut our Saudi oil imports in half. Back when we did the paper.
Yeah.
Right. But so that's what when they say they're spending money on infrastructure, what they're really doing is paying off their political friends.
Right, and now we have to continue to prop up these increasing number of white elephants that are these public transit systems, particularly post-pandemic, where people are even less inclined to use public transportation. Metra in Chicago is operating at like a quarter capacity, and it doesn't seem like that's going to significantly spike anytime soon, but we're just going to continue funneling money into these mass transit systems because that's part of the grand vision to, go to a bike riding, carless society. I mean, unless it's, of course, electric sports utility vehicles that we subsidize.
Yeah. The bottom line, though, is that the nation's infrastructure does need some help. There is a little bit of help in that bill, but for the most part, what's going to happen is it's the states and the cities that are going to fix it, not the federal government.
Or not fix it. Kevin Hassett, Distinguished Visiting Fellow at the Hoover Institution, Managing Director of the Lindsay Group, who served as the Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under Trump from 2017 to 2019. His new book, The Drift, Stopping America's Slide to Socialism. Kevin, thanks for joining us. Good luck with the book.
Great to be here. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Here's a special message from Illinois Policy about how you can help restore true democracy in Illinois.
The most common question we hear from Illinois residents is, what can I do to help? Here's the answer.